Hey, Nick.
Can you hear it now, David? Red. Seems like sometimes that means it's muted.
Hey, Nick.
Okay. I can't.
Nick, I hear a lot of chatter in the background, so I'm assuming it's because you got close to the microphone.
Yeah, well, let's get settled in here.
But it's like, it's one of those things.
We can, mic here, that'll help.
It's just weird. It's just such a thing.
Can you hear a little better now?
That is better.
Okay, good.
There we go. Now it's fine.
All right.
So I can do some intro. The website. She looked at it and clicked later. So like the table where we have the. Oh, it's got a map.
Okay, right.
Yeah. Here, and I don't think I already have. This QR code says something about charging.
Yeah, for those of you online, we're just gonna take a couple minutes and finish ordering, and then we'll get started.
So map.
It's gonna be Matt. Matt, yes, sir, Matt. Oh, so there it is. This guy's not just one word. Yeah.
Susie, can you hear?
So what do we do about pain?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, Krista, can you hear?
Information.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, all right, just trying to figure out why Amber is not able to hear.
Yeah. Forget how good that was. I think if you just go through that process, it won't charge you. It'll still, at the end, kind of like when you give them a credit card for the whole or incidental kind of thing. We can use mine. If you want to order on my.
Since I can't get mine to work and I want to have to make her pay for it, I'd rather just do that.
Yeah, you want to get paid.
Like, right? I don't know, I know, so that's the thing they're really actually. Yeah, I won't charge you until then, but I'm like, like other city now, I don't pay. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, oh, we'll figure it out. Okay. You can see I scan that. I use her phone. Our phones do something on the line. You can figure out what. Oh, okay, that's right. Okay, so the group's gonna pick up the food. And when any alcohol, then that's something we'll have to pay for. We'll get soda and stuff too. And theoretically, if you order through the little icon here, or QR code, then at the end, they'll be able to pull all that food and put it on one tab. Oh, we're gonna change it now to you.
Yeah, you can put it on my phone.
Yeah. You're right.
Probably
Yeah.
mute, let's just mute, but I don't wanna cut them off, if they wanna jump in sometimes. This is interesting.
All right, so is everybody ordering figured out? And feel free to just pass the phone around to whoever.
I don't know if I'm doing it right or not.
We're gonna go get started here. Here, I'm like, I'll use it. Then when I bring it, all we have that brings it over to you, that's all we have. Okay, we're gonna get started, you guys.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Wanted to hear you, how to do that. Thank you for coming to our June meeting. We are the Arizona Association of Environmental Professionals. We have a lot of people sitting in the room here with us. A lot of new folks, so we're gonna go around and do some introductions. And we'll get to the online folks as well. Again, my name is Jennifer Jennings. I am a senior environmental planner with here Right of Way Services, and I'm the president of AZAEP. And why don't we just go around the table here, if you're
Sure.
comfortable doing that?
So my name is Scott Sprague. I'm with Arizona Game and Fish Department. I did not sign up to be here today, but Sherry Boucher out of our Habitat program did, and she was unable to make it. She's sick, so figured I would jump at the.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
I am Nancy Shelton. I am with Jacobs Engineering and Senior Environmental Planner as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Xavier McNeish. I'm an environmental planner with Jacobs also.
Awesome.
I'm Adam Levin. I'm a soon to be environmental planner, consulting starting.
Nice, congratulations.
I'm Warren. I'm an environmental planner.
I'm Kathleen Meadows, and I'm newly with MD5, and I am a environmental project manager. My name is
Adam.
My name is Lauren Slikowski. I'm with the MD. I'm actually a structural engineer, but I am here with Diana, who invited me.
I'm as an engineer, as a senior environmental planner and the environmental planning lead. And I'm also a mentor for Lauren in the UST program, so that's why I'm here to experience doing other aspects besides just doing engineering.
We do. Oh, welcome.
I'm Tiffany Sprague. I am with Arizona Game and Fish Department and our conservation program. And I'm also lead for our department. Really. Yes, that's how I got it.
Yes, yeah.
He does it in a lot of renewable.
Some renewable energy, a lot of transportation projects as well. So,
Your name, I'm sorry.
Tiffany Sprague.
Tiffany Sprague.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and I just locked us out of this. This needs to order.
Sandra Johnson. And our esteemed speaker tonight. Yeah, want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Nick Fraser. I'm an environmental planner, also with SWCA. I work for our Northern Arizona planning team, Flagstaff, but I work remotely here.
You are.
Yes, that's a good point. And the trust.
Y'all see this? And online, we have, who do we have online?
Amber posted something about herself in the chat.
Amber, we have Amber Huntoon Colvin, environmental, oh, it just scrolled up. Oh, she's with ACS / Commonwealth / Headway. Starbucks, no microphone, so welcome, Amber. You guys, what is the sound quality online? Susie says it's garbled and hard to understand.
You're pretty clear, but the people in the back, I can't hear very well.
Okay,
And it sounds like there's someone talking in the background, and I don't know if that's you guys talking and we're just picking it up or what.
Probably the server coming in and out maybe when the door opens. Amber says she have Vicky Castile, who is an environmental resources specialist with UCA. And
Yeah, it's somebody
Alexandra
on the
what's-
computer that's giving feedback.
because the speaker is. We have Alex Permar, biologist, ecologist. Good. Everybody? Yeah, if you guys are online and not speaking, can you please mute yourself? And we have David McIntyre with McIntyre Environmental. David is our secretary. Oh, and Susie Morales. Susie's on here, right? Yeah. Susie Morales with Recon Environmental is our vice president. Okay, did I get her? Oh, we have a lot of people online. Krista Thompson. Ooh, I'm not sure. I apologize, Krista. Project manager, geospatial analyst with Headway Environmental. Susie, okay, now is that everybody? Vicky Castillo. David, Krista. Okay. So, and close that out. For those of you who are new to AZAEP and don't know much about us, we have our website up here, azaep.org. And if you come here, you can find out information about who we are, what we do, how to become a member, as it's so clearly labeled up here, all these things, how to become a member, benefits and dues. It's laid out here. And right there, you can pay online. That question has come up, so. What we do, under here, we've got some yearly highlights. Here's an important thing you guys want to keep an eye on, job postings. These can change frequently. We have a few of them on there. Sometimes we have more, sometimes less. If you are a corporate member, you can post job openings on here for free. It's included with your corporate membership. Also under here is a listing of our monthly member meetings. And here you can also pay for the meetings online. Our virtual meeting fee is only $8, and that money goes into our scholarship fund. Member meetings, in-person meetings, for a member is $20, non-member is $25, students are just $10 for an in-person meeting. Students also have free membership. So if you know any students out there who want to start building their network, encourage them to join. We recently got an Instagram page for the group, AZ_AEP, I think it is. And I'm trying to reach out to a lot of the schools and student groups, different organizations to kind of grab those students in and get them interested in sharing some of this information with them. So if your organization has an Instagram page, please come find us and follow us so we can grow that network. Let's see, I think that's probably enough with that. Our agenda, which you have some hard copies of the agenda in front of you. I'm not going to go through this whole thing.
I know we always print it up and send it out, and I never go through the entirety. And I usually never go through it in the same order that it's printed, because I just start rambling. So just some current general announcements and some general information about our group. We have 306 members, including those under a corporate membership. And with the corporate membership, the benefit is anybody in your organization can attend at a member price.
Pastor chicken sandwich.
We have our list of corporate members here, in case you're not sure if your organization is a corporate member or not. We currently have 16 of them. Like I said, student memberships are free. And just $10 for a student to attend a meeting. We do have a scholarship fund. We did pause it this year because we were in the midst of planning the national conference, which was just held in May up here in Phoenix, and it was wildly successful. We broke all of our goal numbers as far as attendance, revenue, everything. It's quite exciting. And today I just learned that AZAEP, we were the host group, are going to get 20% of the proceeds, and that's going to equal about $12,000. Wow.
Oh,
That's going to go into our scholarship, mostly into our scholarship fund, probably all of it into our scholarship fund. So next year in the fall, we're going to start up on the scholarship process again, probably redefining what it is that we want to look for in a student who applies for the scholarship. So if you're interested in being on the scholarship committee, please let one of us that's on the board know. And it'll be fun. So in the past, we've given out $5,000 as an award, which was huge. So maybe not that much this time, so we can spread it out a little bit more. We do have elections coming up if you're interested in becoming a member at large. We are seeking nominations until July 11th. Okay, is that right? You can send a short resume and a bio to azaep@azaep.org if you're interested in nominating yourself, or if you want to nominate a coworker. So every year we have an elections of some sort. Our board is split. So 1 year it'll be officers, and the next year it's members at large. And so this year it's the members at large that are up. And I will let you guys kind of read through that more if you're interested, or please feel free to ask questions. Upcoming events. In July, we have Stanley Toll, who is an environmental protection specialist with HUD. And he is going to be talking about their environmental compliance process and an overview of HUD's NEPA regulations. I don't know if you guys have ever dealt with HUD NEPA. It's easy but complicated at the same time. Or maybe convoluted. Yeah, so he's going to go over that process with us. In August, we have Courtney Rose, who's with the Cultural Resources Program in Pima County. And she's going to be talking about Pima County's land management in regards to cultural resources and site steward monitoring and land planning. That will be in Tucson. July tentatively is in Phoenix, but I think actually, and Susie can correct me if I'm wrong here, he was going to be virtual, right? He's in like he's in San Francisco. So
Correct. You will be virtual.
We may just make that a full-on virtual meeting. But we'll let you know. So September, we still have open. If you know of an interesting topic, or you have an interesting topic that you would like to share with everybody, or you know somebody who would make a good speaker, again, let one of us on the board know. Susie has been awesome in finding really great speakers for us for the last year or so. October, we have Elise Gornish, who is with the Cooperative Extension Specialist at the University of Arizona Natural Resources and the Environment. She's gonna be talking about invasive species in Arizona and their impacts on our native plant communities. And again, that is tentatively scheduled for Tucson. November, we have Mary Ellen Walsh, who's with SHPO, Arizona State Historic Preservation Office. And she's going to be talking about historic preservation and section 106. So now that brings us to Nick. And I will turn screen and everything over to you. And you can.
I don't think the order's been submitted yet.
Oh,
All right. Well, first of all, thanks everyone for coming out. It's very nice to see a big group of folks here today. Let me get this set up for us. Can't see what Zoom is. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'll try to stand for this. So before I jump into the presentation itself and go through the slide deck, I kind of want to give a little background on how we got here. Back in, I think it was March, we were having our monthly meeting and our speaker canceled at the last minute. So we kind of decided we get together as a group and just talk about all the projects everybody's working on and what's interesting in our careers right now. And I kind of got on a rant about how busy we are with solar right now and how things seem to be changing really fast. And we needed a speaker for June. So they thought this would actually make a pretty interesting presentation. So I wanted to start there because it's a little bit different than a lot of the presentations we've had here, which are usually more educational. Somebody who's presenting on a big project they've completed recently or a scientific study, and they've got a lot of data to share with you and a lot of information to absorb. But I want this presentation to hopefully be more of a starting point for a discussion. I'll give you a little bit on my background, you know where I'm coming from, but I'm not an expert in solar energy. I've been doing consulting work for about 4 years now. My background's primarily in wildlife biology and vegetation management. And right now I do a lot of NEPA work. So those are kind of like my specialties, what I feel comfortable about talking about the most, but we're not going to get into a lot of detail on either of those tonight. In fact, this is a very high level kind of overview of the state of things. And I want to touch on a lot of different topics because there are so many different things in play here that kind of affect where we're heading. And it sounds like we have a really diverse group of folks here tonight, everybody from engineering, biology to environmental planning. So I kind of want to like set the stage and talk a little bit about some actual hard facts. I'm not just going to ramble on for half an hour. Look at kind of where we are with solar and wind in Arizona, what people are talking about, where they think things are heading over the next few years, and then where I think things are headed over the next few years, and some of the challenges we might face along the way, and how that might affect all of us in our jobs and also living here in Arizona. So I hope at the end we can have very productive discussion, and I'd like to hear everybody else's thoughts on where they think things are heading. So for my background, like I said, I've only been doing consulting for about 4 years now, so I'm pretty new to the field. But before that, I came from the agency background. I started with the Nevada Conservation Corps just over 10 years ago, back in 2012. I spent a couple of years doing a lot of trail work for them, but we partnered with BLM, Forest Service, lots of local wildlife and management agencies, doing all kinds of habitat restoration projects. And then I went on from there to work with the National Park Service and their exotic plant management team, which focuses on vegetation control. And then from there to work at a wildlife refuge as an assistant manager. So I spent a lot of time doing bio, and I think that that's kind of influenced where I'm coming from. And you know, I'll say now, if you catch me saying anything wrong, don't feel afraid to step in and correct me. Like, I put Clean Water Act on some of these slides, and Vicky's here, thank God, because I don't want to talk about it, because everybody thinks something completely wrong. But like, I want to touch on each of these a little bit without digging into all the specific requirements, and then we can talk a little bit more at the end. So let me jump in. Let's start with kind of where we came from. So this is looking at the last 10 years in Arizona. Right now we've got about 6,400 megawatts of total installed solar in the state, which is fifth in the country. And that's generating about 10% of the electricity we're using here in the state. So you can see we started pretty like old back in 2013, which has been part due to this big concentrated solar power project, which you'll see we haven't done any since then. And then at the bottom here, the dark blue is like residential rooftop solar, yellow is commercial rooftop solar, a little bit of green community solar here, but what we're really looking at is the bright blue industrial utility PV scale solar. So you can see it's been pretty steady, but we've had a couple big peaks in there, 2016, 2019, but we're like inching upward here into 22. And then this is just a little map to give us some context on where the facilities are right now. You can see Arizona is pretty empty for the most part, and a lot of these facilities are actually concentrated near some of our bigger cities, which is going to come into play later in this discussion. And then I want to briefly touch on wind. This is mostly a solar presentation because Arizona is mostly a solar state, but there's actually been a good bit of wind development already. We've only got about 618 megawatts, and that's coming from all of like 4 or 5 projects. You can see they're mostly up there in northern Arizona along the Mogollon River. So, to set up a discussion, where are things going to go for the next 10 to 15 years? And I wanted to start with looking at, what capacity does the state have for new projects? And these are a wind potential map over here. You can kind of see most of our wind potential is right there along the Mogollon Rim in northern Arizona. And then this is our solar potential map. And it looks pretty simple because the whole state is great for solar. I mean, it only gets a little bit higher for red there, but pretty much the entire state has got really good insulation levels. And then what you're seeing here in gray is our existing transmission network, which is going to be important too, but I've got a better figure for that we're going to look at in a little bit. So what's the growth projection? This is for the US overall, over the next, let's go back a little ways, but we're going out to 2028 here over the next 5 years. And you can see this looks like the map that we started with, and then like we're going, they want to get 50 gigawatts per year installed in 2028. It's like 50,000 megawatts. We're talking tons and tons of solar facilities here. There's a lot to construct. So taking a closer look at Arizona, like what's going on right now, this is just for BLM lands. What we're seeing, these are active solar proposals that the BLM is currently considering. Yellow is solar, blue is wind, got some geothermal going on here. But you can see we've got quite some big bubbles here. This means about 7 to 12 projects. We've got 13 to 24. But this right here represents, almost 30 projects just on BLM land that are being considered in Arizona right now. And I wish I could like put together a really cool map of every land ownership and every project being considered at the moment, but it's actually a lot harder than you would think. But BLM plays a pretty big role in the solar industry here. It's one of the biggest landowners, and they have a very clear process for solar. So a lot of people work with them because they kind of know what they're getting into. BLM also designates solar energy zones that are specifically designed for solar applicants and do competitive lease sales. So it's very geared toward the solar industry. So now that we know where things are going, I'm going to get into some of the technical details here. Don't get like hung up on this spreadsheet at all. None of this data is important. I'm going to scroll through these really fast. But for those of you who don't know, the way generation works is that we start with an application to interconnect. So a developer wants to build a project, they have to go to a utility, submit an application, say we want to build a facility of this size, connecting to this line with a commercial operation date in 2028. And when they do that, the utility puts them in this queue. And the queue is like a first come, first served system. And the utility's job is to go through these projects and study what impact they would have on transmission systems. If we interconnected your 1,000 megawatt project to this transmission line, would it cause any faults? Would it trip any circuits? Would it be thermally overloading any lines? Are there any concerns or upgrades that are needed to accommodate your project? So this is the beginning of APS's active queue list, I think. Q196, so that says, so it starts around Q200, all the other projects before then, they've either been approved or constructed, and then it keeps going, and going, going, and going.
So those are
And
each
go.
a different project?
So every single row in the sheet represents a different project, and you can see this column over here is telling us what type of project it is, so. I saved these here, we can come back and talk to us about these later, because there's some interesting stuff going on. But you'll see a lot of these are combined energy projects, solar plus energy storage, we've got some standalone battery projects, we've got an biodiesel project here. But if I went back through all these one by one, you'd see the vast majority are solar and wind applications. And down there, they're at Q100, 528. We've got like 300 something projects in the study queue to look at right now.
This is just APS, this is.
Yeah, so this is just APS, which is one slide. Oh, that covers this little green area right there. 300 active APS applications, about half of those being solar or wind in just our little area. All these other areas are the other utilities or regions that have their own queue. So we're looking at a very small slice of the pie here, even though Arizona kind of disproportionately weighs into solar. So why is this happening? Arizona is the second in the nation for solar potential, just looking purely at how much sun we have and how much energy we can generate. Where did we get here? You know, this renewable portfolio standard, it's been around for a while now. It set it at 15% by 2025, which we talk about a lot, but nobody really talks about is that 30% of that is from rooftop solar. So we're only really looking to generate 10% of Arizona's renewables or Arizona's electricity from renewables, which we're already doing with that.
Do you know why that is? I'm just curious.
Why it's set this way? So it's actually set by the Arizona Corporation Commission, and they said this a while back, kind of early on. They weren't being too ambitious, and then back in 2020, they considered a rule that would increase this 50% carbon free by 2035, and then 100% carbon free by 2070. Everybody got really excited about it, and they thought it was going to go through. And then I don't know the whole story, but last year they turned around, voted it down, and decided to skip with just this 15%. So it's kind of hard to explain why we're seeing so many solar applications in Arizona when we've already met our 15%, which is only 10% from utility. So one thing that's adding to the boom, of course, is the Inflation Reduction Act, which everybody's been talking about a lot. This bill, $369 billion for renewables and green energy infrastructure, and then when you start digging down into the bill and trying to figure out how that all works, what you find is that most of that is actually credits for energy efficiency, rooftop solar, and community solar. It doesn't actually earmark large chunks of money for utility scale solar projects. So all the companies right now are trying to figure out how that works. Are they going to get tax credits for the battery storage systems they're installing? Are they going to get tax credits for the solar panels? They're really waiting to get some more details from the administration. But one big point that's in very fine print that $153 million of that is specifically earmarked for tribal nations here in Arizona. So there's going to be a big push to invest on tribal lands at a bare minimum. And then as we figure out what's going on with these tax credits, the developers get some more clarity on how that works. We're going to see them pushing to take advantage of those tax credits too. And the other issue recently has been the shortage in solar panels and chips and other supply chain issues. So now that those are resolving themselves, some solar panels coming back in, the chips coming back in, and all of a sudden we can start moving forward with these projects that have been sitting and waiting. And then another big one is the Department of the Interior's renewable energy goals, which are permitting 25 gigawatts, 25,000 megawatts of onshore renewables by 2025. DOI link, so that includes BLM and some of our other entities. So that's driving a lot of this demand for new solar projects. But what's really interesting about Arizona is this last little bar. net interstate flow of electricity, -200. That means we're sending 200. Well, this isn't BTUs, they would give me megawatt, but we're sending 20% of our electricity out of the state to California. So why would anybody want to build a new solar project in Arizona if we don't need any more electricity? We've already met our renewable portfolio standards. We're not gonna replace a lot of the facilities that are in place. We're not gonna replace hydroelectric power. We're not gonna replace our nuclear fuel plants. We might start shipping into some of this natural gas and coal. They shut down the Navajo generating station 2 or 3 years ago. So there's some room there to add more solar to Arizona. But what's really important is that most of the solar that gets installed here is going to have to go out of state because there's just no market for it here. So where is it going? California. California's renewable portfolio standard is 60% by 2030 and 100% renewable by 2045.
Wow.
And you can see down there in Southern California, it's already pretty dense with projects. And if anybody has worked on projects in California, you probably know that it's like the hardest place to permit anything. So everybody would much rather build over here in Arizona where we don't have a state environmental policy act to deal with, and the regulations are a little bit easier to work with. And you can see we got plenty of room left over here to work with and get stuff in California. So what does it take? And this is where I want to start looking at the trends, because what we've seen in the past, if you remember that first slide, that a lot of these solar facilities are built near towns. They're being built on private lands, municipal lands. They're not state, they're not federal. Why is that? Because we all know how much work it takes to comply with all of these federal policies. If it's NEPA, you're going to need an EA or an EIS. It's going to take years to prepare, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. If you're on BLM land, you might have to go through the variance process, which can add another year and a lot more money. Then you're going to have to comply with endangered species, bald golden eagle protection, migratory bird. What does this mean practically? Like on the ground surveys, we've got to pay staff to go out there. They've got to collect baseline data. If it's a wind facility, they're going to need to do 2 years of avian and bat use studies to get a baseline for their analysis. They're going to have to do nesting bird surveys during construction. They might have to get an eagle take permit for a wind facility. And these can all be very difficult and time consuming. We've also got our cultural compliance, section 6, which some of will be presenting on soon. Government to government, Clean Water Act. But again, like, what does this really mean? It means cultural surveys. If you have a 1,000 megawatt solar project on 10,000 acres, it could cost over $1 million to go out and survey all of that land and get the compliance you need for your federal permits. Same thing for the Clean Water Act. We're probably going to go out and do delineation and a ton of field work. It's money, money, money. There's lots of money that we're spending to get this project built. If we're not working with the federal government, if we're just on private land, we're not connecting to any federal infrastructure, we're probably only complying with these local and state laws. If it's got a long gen tie, they're going to need a CEC from the Arizona Corporation Commission. Again, that's a long process. It costs lots of money. Arizona State Land Department right away, if you want to cross their land, again, cultural compliance. Waters of the US, every little piece, you got to go out and survey it and put together all of this data. And then down here, local. This is if you're just on private land. We've got 3 little things. Just maybe you need a comprehensive plan amendment if you're in an area that's designated to the comprehensive plan and rural residential and you want to change that. That can be difficult. But otherwise, you're probably just going to need a conditional use permit. And if you're getting a conditional use permit, probably don't have to go out and do 100% cultural surveys, 100% waters of the US survey. You don't have to do all of this baseline reporting and investigation and preparing these large multi-million-dollar permitting documents. So the focus over the last 10 years has really been on projects that kind of stick to just this local permit. We've been putting them on private land close into cities where we can complete that permitting process very quick and very cheap. So where are we headed? This is land ownership in Arizona. You can see there's a good bit of private, which is like better color. A lot of it is tribal. We've got a big patch of Forest Service in the middle, and then a decent bit of BLM down on the bottom. So this influences kind of where we can put our projects and how much it's gonna cost to get them constructed or permitted. So what's changing? This is where things start to get interesting. So everything I just said is the way things have been done so far. But a lot of these smaller local governments are looking and seeing these big projects being built. They're realizing the developers are getting kind of an easy path on the environmental compliance side because they don't have to do a lot of this legwork involved. Sure, there's going to be some public involvement, you're going to do some notification, hold public hearings, but generally your project's not going to attract nearly as much attention as it would if you were doing a NEPA document and it's going up on e-planning where all of the NGOs and everybody on the mailing list is going to hear about it right away and want to comment and get involved. So things have started changing at the county level here in Arizona. Some of these are pretty old. I mean, this goes all the way back to 2010. But these early ones are a little bit more specific to wind energy because we put up that one facility over in Dry Lake and everybody decided they did not want a wind farm visible from their house. So some of these northern Arizona counties where the wind resource is took early action and put these ordinances in place. But they really were pretty focused on just like setting setbacks for the wind turbines and other small measures to kind of make them fit within the communities there. Now, as we continue on into 2022, this is just last year, Coconino County passes their utility scale renewable energy ordinance, which is the first like really comprehensive county level ordinance for renewable energy. This imposes a much more strenuous process on the developers that looks almost like NEPA. They've got to do 100% cultural surveys, 100% waters of the US surveys. They've got to develop a plan of development and get all of their compliance and monitoring plans, like a weed management plan, a restoration plan, a commissioning plan, a fire protection plan, the whole 9 yards. Like the county is just not going to let them, you know, get by on those requirements. Then just earlier this year in March, Navajo Nation, you saw they were one of the biggest landowners up there, issued an executive order from the president's office because they had received so many applications for new solar facilities and new projects that they felt really overwhelmed and wanted to create a more focused process to get those developers through. I mentioned the decommissioning of the Navajo switchyard up there. That opened up 2,000 megawatts of capacity for new facilities to take advantage of, and 500 megawatts of that was allocated specifically to the tribe to use for developing solar and wind on their reservation. And then very, very recently in April, the state started to make changes. If you're not familiar with the Arizona Corporation Commission, they have a line siting committee, and typically they're responsible for reviewing any new transmission lines built in the state. A lot of these solar projects require a small transmission line to connect to the grid. Well, CEC got so overwhelmed with all the incoming solar applications, they decided to create a streamlined process so that they could step back how much review they're responsible for.
Boneless wings, garlic prawns, and then a Costco chicken with barbecue sauce. Okay, so then. I'll be right back.
Okay, so what did they do on April 4th? They decided to streamline this review process, and what they did is they appointed what they're calling a hearing officer. So normally when the CEC reviews a project, you have to go before a full judicial review committee. They're not judges, but they are members of the committee that are appointed or elected in, and they have to go through a 2-day process of hearings. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, we can take some of it. I thought that one was gonna be shorter. I am being loud, kind of forget, but hopefully I think we can hear a lot of fun stuff. Okay, so streamline CEC review process. What did they do? Normally, these cases are heard in front of a full committee You've got to have lawyers involved, you've got to set up a audio video presentation, make it a hybrid meeting that the public can participate in, you've got to rent meeting venues and get caterers. And they said, all right, if your project is more than a mile from any or more than 1,000 feet from any residential areas, and there's no major cultural resource or biological resource concerns, we're not gonna make you sit in front of the committee anymore. We're just gonna have a hearing officer. You can submit your docket like you normally would with all of your exhibits on why this is a good project, and instead of going through this 2-day process, one guy's gonna sit down and look at it and sign off on it, and you're all done. And the other thing they did was to redefine what constitutes a transmission line. Used to be anything that was over 115 kilovolts and had 2 or more poles counted as a transmission line. A lot of these solar projects are built right next to a substation or an existing transmission line, and they need a very, very short Gentile line, less than a mile, less than 5 structures. And the CEC said, all right, we're not gonna consider that a transmission line for purposes of our review anymore. So this is going to significantly cut back on the permitting requirements. Yeah.
Who determines if there's significant cultural or biological?
That is a very good question. No one has provided any clarity on that yet. They appointed a hearing officer, they kind of gave some like general description of projects that aren't controversial, projects of low concern, and listed off some like typical things like biological and cultural. But I think ultimately it'll be a hearing officer's decision. If they have concerns over any resources, then it's their purview to elevate it up to the commission for a full hearing. And if you get any public involvement, any public pushback, you don't qualify for the expedited review anymore. Going back to a full here.
So they still have to do public involvement.
Yes, the public involvement is still required. They still got to do notifications, outreach, give people an opportunity to comment. It's really only if nobody comments or you don't get anything, major, then you'll qualify. But we see that on a lot of CPCs. It's not a very well-known process. Like I said, a lot of people want to get involved in NEPA. As soon as you get published a NEPA document, you're going to get a lot of public attention. These smaller processes don't garner as much public involvement. So we're kind of seeing like this conflict here where some of our local communities are trying to push for more intensive regulation of solar, whereas at the state level, we're trying to ratchet back some of the requirements. And then related to this Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill, our governor, Kate Hobbs, earlier this year said that they're going to establish a new office called the Governor's Office of Resiliency, and it's going to replace what used to be known as the State Energy Program. So some of you might know about that. That was before I moved here. It got disbanded all the way back in 2015. The Republican legislature said it was a waste of time and money, but they were there to take advantage of programs like the Inflation Reduction Act, or their equivalent back then, and advocate for grant money and other tax incentives for the state. That was their job to get that money from the federal government. So this new office will do all of that and some more. But the key is like they really have to have this to take advantage of those Inflation Reduction Act funds. That's probably going to be more on a state level, like community solar and rooftop solar and energy efficiency incentive, not so much the utility scale, but it is the transition we're seeing in the state, back towards a more cohesive energy policy and program than we've had for maybe the last 5 to 8 years. Okay, so we're getting close to the end here now. Bored you with a lot of details. This is another big development. I think you can see June 2023. I think this came out a little bit over a week ago. This is the preliminary alternatives matrix for BLM's solar PEIS update. So you don't know about the solar PEIS back in 2012, I think. BLM published a solar PEIS and it made pretty broad and sweeping decisions on where solar would and wouldn't be allowed on BLM land all across the Western United States. So they'd update it every 10 years. It's been 10 years, and this is where they're starting. I won't get into too much detail here, but if you're familiar with the solar PEIS, you know that like a lot of stuff was excluded. They really kind of pinched everything down to some specific solar SEZs where they wanted to have competitive leasing. They left some stuff, what's called variance, where you're not excluded, but you have to go through a more intensive process to get an application process. But what they are proposing now, most of these alternatives would open up significantly more area to solar than we're seeing right now. And interesting, they want to get rid of the variance process actually, and just have open or excluded and no more of this variance stuff. They've included variance options for each of these alternatives. But you know, they start with the most restrictive, kind of just building near existing transmission lines on previously degraded land. And they get a little bit less restricted as you go, less requirements for proximity to transmission, less requirements for previous disturbance. These ones over here, it's just like, oh, it's too steep, then you can't build on it. So what it means is we can see a lot more BLM land open to solar in the next 2 to 3 years when this finishes up, depending on alternatives. But it's definitely a lot broader than it was before. So to kind of finish this up, I wanted to look at some recent news articles because, you know, a lot of this is very theoretical. A lot of these bills have just been passed or they're just starting to come about. We've got 2 years before this BLM, you know, solar EIS gets finished. But what's been happening in the meantime is all those people who have been living in those towns and watching the developers come in and buy up the old farmland and private parcels and just rush in there and build before anybody really knows what's going on, are really unhappy about things. So I'm gonna kind of harp on Mojave County because they've been in the news a lot the last couple of weeks. This was from back in May. The county board of planning and zoning decided to postpone a vote to issue a rezone for some solar projects up by Golden Valley. This was supposed to be a positive article about how some of our recent legislation could be boosting Arizona solar development was about the Inflation Reduction Act. But you can see what they said down here. It's from a solar developer. He said most of the larger parcels are being picked up by the solar companies in Buckeye, Tonopah, and Gila Bend. In 3 or 4 years, I anticipate a huge shortage. He concludes this can best be compared to the gold rush, that we're viewing the land as gold. So I'm not the only one who feels this way. The solar developers are already seeing things tighten up, not just the permitting processes, but the land that's available.
And the solar panels.
Yes, and the solar panels. So everybody's saying they're getting over these supply chain issues, but it's still kind of left to be seen. One thing we did see happen right after the Inflation Reduction Act was a bunch of new companies proposing solar PV manufacturing plants here in Arizona. Right now, it's mostly coming from overseas, but pretty soon they're going to be cranking them out right here in Arizona. It won't be nearly the problem it has been. So here's more about Mojave County. This was actually just last week. They went from postponing the vote to issuing a resolution against all future solar in the county. They specifically called out 3 projects on BLM land that they don't want to go forward. It's not binding. The county doesn't get to control what happens on BLM land, but we've reached the point where public opposition going up the chain to our elected representative, and they're really starting to look closer. And this last one down here was actually from less than a week ago. Apparently, some lovely legislators here in Arizona put forth a bill that would prohibit solar on any grazing land in the entire state, whether it's ASLD, National Forest, BLM, doesn't matter. If it's got a grazing lease on it, then no solar unless you compensate the grazing holder for the entire life of the project. And KDOT said no. But you know, it shows that there's a lot going on. There was another bill passed just a couple of years ago where the state legislator decided to take control over the solar rooftop rate adjustments. I'm going to get into that because I don't know about it. But you can see the state legislator making a concerted effort to kind of jump in here and get in the way of things. You know, who knows who will be after Kate Hobbs and whether they'll be as for renewable as she is. So last subject that I talked about earlier, transmission system. We talked about the permitting constraints, we talked about public opposition and the constraints they present. But what I think is really interesting is that we don't really have any way to get this power over to Arizona. This is called Path 46, it's like 14 very large transmission lines, and they carry all that 20% of our electricity we're exporting through Vegas and then down into Southern California. But that line can't really carry much more. And you can see we've only got a couple other little options to cross the river there and get the power to California. You got one new line proposed right here. This is APS's 10-year plan, what they want to do. You can already see interconnection projects between big facilities, in substations, but you don't see a lot going on over here. They're not planning on building a lot of large transmission lines in California to carry this power there. So that study queue I mentioned, this is what happens. Once your project's been applied, they give you a system impact study and they tell you, you know, what your project can do. This is one of the most recent system impact studies. It's very boring technical language. But what you want to get out of this is that these 4 projects here, they're represented by numbers because they want to maintain confidentiality of a total proposed capacity of 2,000 megawatts, how much they want to put on this system. What APS today is that between the 4 of you, during peak summer loading, you can put 250 megawatts on the system. That's all it can handle. So that means curtailing your solar facilities output by what, 75% or something to meet their requirements. And you can see right here, eastern flows to California and Nevada are constrained. So we've reached the point where the utilities are saying, sorry, there's nothing we can do. So here's 10 West Link. They just started construction last week. All of this news is very new. It's gonna start at the Delaney substation here in Maricopa County. All the way through Port Site and over the Colorado River substation in California. This has a capacity of 3,200 megawatts, and we're planning 10,000 something over the next 5 years. So that line is going to get like maybe a third of the capacity we need. And if any of you have ever worked in transmission, you know how long it takes to get a large 500 kV line built. That's like a 10 to 20-year planning process. So the fact that we have an already identified new routes and started the permitting processes for those tells me we're going to see a big lag from when we can build these plants to when we can actually get the power to somewhere that needs it. But California is going to pay for it all. That's the slide. They actually signed an agreement a couple years ago with the Arizona utilities saying that they would pay for all these new lines to take power to California, and that was the last time solar was big news in Arizona. They said it was gonna be doomsday and we're all gonna have rolling blackouts because California stole all of our power and we have nothing left for ourselves. Turns out that's really just because we don't have a great transmission system here in Arizona. And even if we weren't exporting the power, we can't move it around the state very efficiently. So transmission planning and transmission permitting is going to be a big piece to actually making all of this solar happen. With that, my funny slide down. So hope there wasn't too much information all at once, but I kind of wanted to go from the past to now and look at, you know, where we started with a lot of these private, smaller projects that were getting pushed through to a bunch of people who really want to build now, but do we have the system in place for it? Are they going to be able to handle some of these more complex permitting processes? Are they going to be able to find the land? Are they going to be able to find the transmission system to connect into? Are they going to be able to overcome public opposition? Are they going to get the tax benefit? Like 1,000 questions to be answered, but it's going to be a big deal, I think, for everyone in this industry because it's going to really take a lot of manpower to get us there. If we want to permit 10,000 megawatts, I mean, who's going to do that? We're all really busy as it is. You saw EPS's queue, like they can't keep up with all the transmission studies, let alone the permitting side. So I think there'll be a lot of change for all of us. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question about battery storage. It's kind of a hot topic right now.
Yeah.
Because of meltdowns. But I'm also curious about what's happening with the you know, like how is that being handled as far as permitting goes? You're talking about an ACC permit for Gentiles, but do they don't require that for the facilities themselves?
For the batteries or
For batteries or facilities, it's just the transmission.
Yeah, it's really weird. The ACC doesn't have jurisdiction over the facilities. They do regulate geothermal plants, I believe. If you want to do a geothermal, you gotta get approval from them, but otherwise they just look at transmission lines. And I don't really know the history there. But that is a good point. You'll see here, energy storage, energy storage, energy storage. These are all combined with energy storage. So there's a ton of standalone energy storage projects here. So that may be one way of kind of overcoming that deficiency in the transmission system. We can store it in batteries for a few hours, you know, that metering situation when they've got to cut back, that's like peak load during the summer, you know, everything's maxed out. But if you could hold on to that power till the evening, when that line frees up space, you can still get that power over to California. So I think that's going to be a really big piece to making this all work. But there's a lot of concerns with the fire, is a big one, especially here in Arizona. And it may be hard for some of the local communities to get their buy-in on these energy storage projects.
I saw that Peoria and Phoenix just passed rules against battery storage.
Oh, really?
I'm not, I didn't read closely, so I'm not sure to what extent. But I know that it's becoming a little more challenging in certain communities to be able to have your battery storage.
Yeah, this is why I wanted all of y'all to be here. I spent a long time trying to find every news article I could about, you know, the industry here lately. But it's hard to catch everything. There's so many different pieces moving right now.
Totally.
They're also using hydrogen generation for the gen packs.
Very good point. We all of a sudden seen a huge influx in hydrogen projects around here too. I've heard of some potential international hydrogen projects, but also a lot down here in the Phoenix and Tucson area. It seems like that's going to be a big focus too. And these pump storage projects. I haven't heard of any specific ones lately, but I know Arizona is one of the few places that already does that, where instead of using a traditional battery, we take the power to pump the water up into a reservoir and then let it out to generate hydroelectricity. Any other questions or anything you've seen?
So you were mentioning how a lot of the developers are trying to go on a private land to minimize the permitting process. But yet you also said that there was going to be a huge influx put onto the tribal lands. What do the
Yeah.
tribes do in terms of permitting?
That's a very good question, and that's why I didn't get into
Might
tribal.
repeat it for the people on,
Oh wait, sorry. what was that?
might repeat it for the folks on.
Oh, yeah, sorry, if you didn't hear that question, we were asking about the large influx on private land, and I had mentioned there being a lot of money earmarked for the tribal lands as well as transmission capacity and kind of how that works, what's tribal permitting like. And it's also in a state of flux. The Navajo Nation is obviously the biggest tribal landowner here. And it's also in an area with really good solar prospects, so I've mostly focused on them recently. And they have a new business leasing process that looks patently similar. It's like they copied and pasted the NEPA regs and then made it a tribal resolution. So the same thing as like the county level, Navajo Nation's taking the same steps to, you know, have more thorough reviews of these projects. And then of course they had the executive order recently that was aimed at getting everybody to the same place. I think they feel overwhelmed by all of this happening all at once. They've got a lot of developers coming in, and working with the tribes is very different than working with your federal agencies. So I think it's going to be a learning curve for some of these developers who haven't worked the tribal projects before. Like they're going to have to at least consider, you know, how to approach these tribes in a way that's going to be beneficial to them. But I imagine we are going to see more tribal specific renewable energy ordinances coming. I think it's a pretty broad concern across the state.
So is the BIA not part of the tribal process? Are they not? Because you have a lot of land and tribal land.
Yes,
So with a lot of land, you're supposed to have BIA.
yes. So that was part of what the Navajo Nation leasing regulations did. They weren't specific to solar renewables. They were specifically designed to give Navajo Nation the authority to do their own environmental review in place of BIA's.
Okay.
And BIA had to prove it. I think it was congressional authorization, like it was a big deal. They've been working on it for a long time. But essentially now, instead of going through the BIA like right of way or lease process, we would be going directly to the Navajo Nation and they would do their own environmental push list, a lot like what VIA would have done.
That's just for energy or is it for?
Any business lease, yeah, it doesn't matter if it's energy or not, if you wanna lease Navajo Nation on a lot of land, then that's the way you're gonna have to go. Yeah.
So I have actually two questions, back like at the very first, I think. Slide that you had. Why only using such a small percent, yeah, I think one more back.
There.
It was that one, why is there, in 2019, well, I've got two questions, but in 2019, it shows like that light blue is really high, and then it drops down, do you know why it dropped down?
I would guess that, yeah, I was gonna say, COVID.
It's kind of weird.
COVID plus the panel shortage, so when the panel shortage
The what?
started.
And
Oh, okay,
Yeah, so
Okay.
all these people, they got all their projects approved and they went to build them, they like literally could not get the solar panels they needed to install. They've been waiting for years to get their orders.
oh yeah, there's a lot of mining that got cut down.
Yeah.
too.
Same thing with the transmission equipment, like these large 500 kilovolt transformers and stuff, like. The manufacturers want like 2 years lead time to build something.
Okay,
So I didn't get into too much detail on like how all these processes overlap, but when you work on a solar project. There's the financing side, they're trying to get the money, and there's the ENC side where they're trying to secure the panels and all the
Right.
equipment they need, and then. Permitting side, we're trying to move the project along, and one of the biggest challenges is getting all that to sync up, right?
and then that 9.8% of the electricity is used in there, are we saying we're sending really that much to California?
Well, this is just
Or
solar.
is that current?
This is how much of the Arizona use is coming from solar, not how much we're producing. Producing 6,400 overall, and this is assuming that all of that stays in the state, that accounts for 10% of our electricity. So when you look at like what we're exporting, like it's kind of hard to tell. I know that where did that one go?
It just seems crazy, those numbers,
I know, I think they're crazy too.
that's why I asked you, I was like,
I
huh?
can find that. But yeah, the Hacienda Palo Verde. This seems so small. When I was reading last, oh wait. Oh, isn't that right? Oh, that's why. This is the Hacienda Palo Verde nuclear power plant. This is a single facility, and it accounts for like almost half of the generation in Arizona.
Right,
Second largest power plant in the entire country of any kind. So I imagine a lot of this going into the state coming from California. In fact, California actually paid for a part of that project. So they would get-
the Palo Verde one?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and then that's my question is, why don't we build another Palo Verde plant, that goes on lead acreage? What's everybody afraid of?
I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, yeah, they're doing fine at Palo Verde, right? But I think,
What is it, 163 acres, and it produces enough electricity for, what is it? I don't know if it's 4 billion or 4 million, I can't remember people, it's a large number.
It's huge. Yeah.
And that's why, it's just a question to throw out there.
No, I think it's a great question. It comes back to the trade-off between solar and wind too, like. See, people hate solar because it takes up so much land, and you can argue that it's way out in the desert, it's not really important habitat, it's nobody's home or anything. I know, sorry.
that was a great point you just made, though.
You can argue, not I can argue, I'm a wildlife biologist, I would not make that argument myself, but I know plenty of people who are like just coasting on that argument. A lot of times we don't have any like endangered species concern, but I didn't get a lot into bio. I know one of the big ones lately is migration, big game migration.
Yep.
Where they build solar facilities in northern Arizona, big open grasslands where the pronghorn like to be, big open grasslands.
Lots of
So-
coral locations.
There's definitely some conflicts, yeah. I mean, one of the things I didn't talk about for state land is native plant inventories. If you wanna cross any state land, they're gonna have to go in and do really detailed surveys of all these protected native plants and then compensate the state trust for all of those, even if they're not considered endangered or protected. There are a lot of biology concerns that go in this, especially when you get to wind. Solar, we don't get nearly as many comments on the biology stuff, we get some concerns, but when you get to wind, everybody's really worried about the birds and the bats and the eagles. If you have eagles in your wind project, it's gonna be a tough one.
I don't know.
Oh, wait, what?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah. I've worked on a couple now. Been challenging. But one thing I didn't talk about is really funny. You know, we worked on a really big wind project recently in another state. I won't get into details. But we just had the public comment period, and of course it was gaining a lot of attention. So we expected a lot of comments, and we got, I think, like 17,000 raw comments. And of course, 8,000 or 9,000 of those were form letters, and then the remaining 4,000 or 5,000, only like 1,700 were substantive that we need to reply to. But still a ton. But the whole reason there's 1,700 instead of like 170 is because of Chat GPT.
Ah,
wait, because of what?
Chat
GPT.
It launched the same time as our scoping period, and
oh, no.
I don't know, at least half of the comments that we got were written by ChatGPT. And it really sucks because ChatGPT like knows the whole internet. So if you say one thing in the EIS, all they have to do is say like, how would I refute this argument? And ChatGPT will spit you out like a 2-page essay full of citations, and then that comes back to us. And all of a sudden we're looking at articles on how vibrations affect earthworm activity in the ground, because
So
they're just gonna find any little thing they can and plug it into that algorithm.
on that, that's interesting because I know with schools, they can run it through a program and it will tell you it's automatically generated. So do you have to entertain a comment from a bot?
Wow, that's actually a really good question.
Great.
Because
That's a
we've
great
taken the
question.
same approach, and like we screen the comments when they come in. We've developed our own little algorithm that can detect
Like-
when it's been written by an algorithm.
Right, so it's like,
It's become the battle of
we
the
only
algorithm.
respond to comments provided by humans.
I know, and it's too bad because the Chat GPT comments are like really on point.
Oh,
Most people, I mean, they are like your average person writing in,
Right.
complaining like, I've lived here
Yeah.
for 50 years and I hate the way it looks. My house is gonna be worth nothing. And then Chat GPT is like, did you know in 2013 in England they did a study and found X, Y, Z, and all of a sudden, like, well, we can't like ignore this and actually publish pieces of literature that applies to this project. So,
That kind of research, I add that to your.
but that's a good point because like at a certain point, like how valuable is that? Is it really public input, or is it just a new opposition tactic? Like, is it just finding a way to gum up the works and slow things down and make this all?
A human had to tell the bot to do it, right? Like,
It's true.
it's
and
still a person who's found a way to get their comment in, but
They have, but the other thing they do is they'll take a form letter and then they give it to an algorithm and have it scramble up the form letter 100 different ways so that we don't immediately recognize it as a form letter. And we gotta have our algorithm go in and unscramble all the
hey,
letters.
you can give that to Chat GPT.
That's literally where we're headed. It's just like we get the algorithm stuff and then we take our algorithm and we fight it out until we get to, whatever comments are left to respond to. So it's been very interesting. That's a very new development. Yeah, it's like,
So many questions and so many comments, but I'll try to keep it down to you. This was awesome. Thank you.
oh,
very
thanks.
much
Thanks.
for it.
Appreciate that.
I live and breathe this stuff every day of my life. So it's good to see it's active on it. So my first question, and I know you've only been in on this for like 4 years, but I'm hoping others in the room might be able to help answer this. So we saw a big bump like this in 2009. And I'm wondering if anybody has a feel for how this compares to that, because like 10% of the proposed projects were built out of that. And I'm wondering what we might realistically see built out of this.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, that's a good point.
Let's see if they
See,
see.
I agree with you, I think it's huge, and I meant to make this other comment, because you were talking about BLM land was jaded for solar. There's a lot of sites that are jaded for solar and wind, so solar and wind are competing for the same sites. And,
Oh, yeah.
and,
And they
And
can
there's-
co-locate them as well.
yeah, and there's lots of multi-companies are competing for the same BLM land.
Yeah, I think it's
So
bad
I
at
think
all,
it's
but
huge.
we see that happen a lot. People coming to us requesting to do some kind of like site evaluation, and we can't tell them that, like 5 other people have said
No, you
to
can't.
evaluate the same site.
Yeah.
A little tricky, but that's really like, that developer was saying it's like a gold rush, like they're running out of land.
Yep.
So that could really affect, how many of these projects get pushed through. And then that last slide I showed with the transmission lines being capped out, I mean, that's
Gotta have a
death
purchase
knell for the
agreement.
project. If you don't have anywhere to put the power, you're not gonna build it.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid what's gonna happen is we're gonna see the big boom, we're gonna get a lot of applications in. We're gonna get a bunch of stuff built, and then we're gonna have to wait, there'll be a lull until we can get new transmission in place. But by then, what's happened to all the tax credits from the Inflation Reduction and all these other incentives, are they gone? So what other legislation is passed in the meantime?
So do you anticipate that facilities will get built without a power purchase agreement or without the capacity on the lines? I mean, would there be, you know, an actual excess in generation relative to capacity?
Yeah, I think the battery storage is a big question for that. The study I showed, the recent one showing those lines maxed out. It's actually way ahead in the queue of a bunch of those standalone battery storage projects. So when you think about it, when they modeled that, they weren't modeling the potential for there to be thousands of megawatts worth of battery with that power on the line to California is maxed out. So I think there's a balance we have there. I think that'll help keep some of these projects alive and keep them moving, but you have to have the battery like pretty close to the facility. Otherwise, you just run into the same problem trying to get, you know, power across the grid to where it needs to be.
I also picture them being built though, because I've, for us, we've done searches on ASLD and as part of the permit, they have to have stuff on ground. It doesn't have to be connected, but they have to have all the facilities and everything on ground within 5 years of that permit. Yeah, they could be on ground and not connected to anything until the transmission line's in. And I'm picturing that happening because they only have that permit for so long.
Is that unique to ASLD or?
I don't know.
I think it is.
Yeah, it might be, but yeah, ASLD, that's part of theirs, yeah.
Yeah, like CUPs for counties usually expire within a couple of years, so a lot of times the developers will have to ask for a couple extra units to get started on construction. So that's just one of those big problems, like trying to sync it all up. We can't ever get these permits to align the way we'd like to, and then ASLD wants a temporary right of entry permit. We're like, no, we can't build for 2 years, we need to go now, and everybody's getting their wires crossed, so.
Yeah, and the projects I worked on were all battery or the hydro because they don't have connection.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, and they'll store it or, you know, hydro, and then they have the plans to connect it, it's just a land issue at that point.
We'll see. I mean, like California said, they're gonna spend 7.3 billion. I don't know how quickly they can get some new transmission lines built, but they definitely already know that this is a problem and they want to address it as quickly as possible. You know, they know the only way they're gonna meet not just their renewable portfolio statements, but actually keep the power on and start getting as much solar coming in Arizona as possible. They already had the one blackouts last summer, the car on the way here, and Pinar was talking about one blackouts this summer, and it's gonna kill 12,000 people in Phoenix. And so people are like alarmed and they really want to get this stuff taken care of as quick as possible. It's just kind of frustrating because you can build the solar as fast as you want, but that's not the problem. We have plenty of capacity, we're sending it all away. We've got more energy than we need, we just can't get it where it's supposed to go.
Do you anticipate potentially maybe another foreign energy people coming in wanting to build transmission lines to take over APS or SRP or WAPA? And
There are,
Oh, that's
there are.
beyond my knowledge. You know of some?
Yeah, there are.
Really?
Mhm.
That's interesting.
There's a lot of new transmission lines that are proposed. And the federal agencies are looking at how to streamline transmission lines and get more out there. We're reviewing projects on that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. We saw that, you know, kind of during the Trump administration where we were, I think some would go all the way back before Trump, like Fast 41. Anybody remember Fast 41? No. Okay, good. But within the last few years, you know, these ideas that we're gonna have some more coordinated permitting process, we're gonna have age limits, time limits, we're gonna have a federal decision for these projects, you know, we're gonna make this so easy. It's not, has anybody seen a project get built way faster than they were 5 years ago?
and they just changed all the laws, so it's all.
I know, the one that the Obama or the Biden administration came in and they did not roll back any of those sort of fast tracking laws. Instead, they added more to them. they wanna see projects go faster. I didn't put that one up here, but, you know, as part of their recent executive order, I think it was, that implemented some of the new NEPA rule changes, specifically the one that allows developers to prepare their own environmental assessment with EIS. So that's another interesting process, and right now as consultants, we're doing all the work for them. We're probably gonna hire us, it's just gonna be people being a first party consultant now, instead of going third party through the agency that's preparing the document. But it could make things go a little bit faster. Let's speed up the agency review side of things. Unless we're gonna hire a lot of new staff and we'll start putting more money into these agencies to help them out. There's only so much they can do now.
I got a question on regulations. I can't imagine that there are any implications, but it's worth asking. Are there any implications from, I don't remember, it's Build America, Buy America, or the other way around? But for any installations that are going on to federal land, like would they have to be following the law?
That's a good question. I thought there was a lot more going on with solar in that act, and then I went to try to dig into it, and I really had trouble finding any details. So the same thing, this was all the money from the Inflation Reduction Act, but we also have the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which also is reported as a big clean energy program, but I haven't heard what exactly that means. And you see with the Inflation Reduction Act, like they don't actually even know what it means, and that's the law, and they don't know what they're gonna exactly do with it yet. So it might take a while to figure out how this is going to shake out on the government regulation and financing side.
So I'm just gonna put this plug out there. So Game and Fish Department is keeping a close eye on renewable energy. The information that you presented here is kind of a drop in the bucket of what's actually being proposed out there, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. And I'm kind of leading the effort from the department, so I'm always interested in how we can better engage in this, because we are trying to engage in every single one of these projects, but we're also trying to look at it from a landscape view. Because all of these projects are processed project by project by project, and they're not looking at this overall view. And your mention of, oh, it's out in the desert, there's not important wildlife habitat. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the focus is on the endangered species, but we're there to focus on the common species and keeping the common species common and keeping these state sensitive species there. And I mean, even common species, if all of this were to be developed, they likely would not exist in this state anymore. So it's substantial. And so I'm gonna put this plug out here. Anything that we can be doing to better coordinate with you, and anything that you can be doing to better coordinate with us, that's what I really want to see out of this, is let's engage together and let's move these things forward in the best, most responsible way that we can.
I agree. It's no good having all that solar.
Hitbox, desert tortoise.
Oh
Oh, yeah.
Desert tortoise is the big one. I
Yeah.
used to work in Nevada and on the Nevada projects, and desert tortoise obviously was a very big one. Very expensive mitigation measures, lots of tortoise fencing and biologists on site to monitor and relocation programs. And, you know, it can become very challenging and expensive when there are issues with that on the ground. Those are just, like I said, the endangered species, the ones that are focused on. I think about species like sagebrush, sparrow, contes, thrasher, and all these ones. Like maybe they're a bird conservation concern, a state with some species, but they're not federally protected, and kind of don't do them do justice. Like, oh, we're destroying 5,000 acres of habitat, but it's really common in the surrounding landscape. So all these wildlife are going to somewhere else go, and it's not going to be a big impact. Maybe that's true for the first project, the second project, the third project, but
When you lose your
3,000th project.
Right. I mean, Sonora and Pronghorn,
Yeah.
most of their habitat is proposed for solar right now, with the exception of the wildlife refuges. And they use that exact argument as there's abundant landscape around it, but what they're not acknowledging is, no, that's proposed for solar.
That's why developers love avoiding feedback when they don't got cumulative effects. A lot easier to kind of, I won't say pull the wool over people's eyes, but when you're looking at them, it's a lot easier to make that argument. And just stepping back and taking a look at the picture. Because This isn't just Arizona, I mean, Arizona obviously is gonna be very important, but it's the whole Southwest, and it's not just, solar, it's wind too, and that has all kinds of other implications in other areas that can be impacted, so. We're gonna have to be, not just like on the state level, we're gonna have to look, migratory birds and bats are facing huge decline. The industry as a whole doesn't come together and find a way to minimize fatalities across the board, then. It could be a really big problem for some.
We have a wind facility in the state that killed 18,000 bats last year, and we don't really do anything about
Don't find anybody that projects.
it. Wow.
Can you check to see if anybody's making comments?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't think about that, I hope you've been able to. speak.
I will say I have business cards if anybody is working on this stuff and wants to coordinate.
Okay, the office, great. Well, if there's any folks online that have questions, feel free to type in the chat.
Actually,
Probably don't need throws.
a question regarding, wind energy. I've heard that there's ideas to design, windmills, for lack of a better word, that don't rely on blades, like they can take in wind energy from other ways. Is that, I don't know how soon that'll be, but it's supposed to be able to reduce at least that danger to bats and birds and things like that.
Yeah, I've seen those too, they've even earlier stage, I think they're coming, like, they're catching on for small scale wind pretty quick, like individual turbine powering, like an off-grid kind of thing. But the industry approach to onshore wind turbines right now is how they can
Bigger, better.
every year they get taller, taller, nobody's closing new technology, they wanna look at putting the whistles on the blades, secure the birds away, or, mounting a camera on them that can see the eagle come in and turn the wind turbine off when it's closed. Technologies like that, make the turbines they're already building safer than that's the whole.
I just remember driving, like you see like the red light blinking, and you're like, where are these red lights blinking? Then you drive past, you're like, oh, okay, yeah.
Some of them, especially these newer wind farms, I had to stop and say, well, I wanted to put like 1,000 times more stuff in here, because there's so many things going on, it's really hard to sit down and they just built or just kicked off construction on a new 500 kV line from Mexico to California to connect to Scotland Farm Fall. But it's something like 700 wind turbines that generate several thousand megawatts of energy, and that's like 10 times the scale of any other project that we've seen built. Most wind projects that have been constructed so far, like 300, 400 is a big project. 800 is really like pushing max. But all the projects we're seeing coming out right now, people want to build 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 megawatts. So it'd be like 500 turbines. We've got hundreds of square miles. Look at the whole facility.
Is that the one that starts in New Mexico and goes over to California? Okay.
Can't remember the name of it. There's so many going
Yeah, I
on.
know what you're talking about.
Emily's the only one that's.
Sunzia is the one that's being built, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's also Trans-West Express in Nevada, that will go in Vegas all the way to Reno. There's the one going from Wyoming down to Nevada, they just built around on that too. They're all western. There's a lot of people building new infrastructure right now, but on the Arizona side, there's not much going on that's. Sunzia just goes across the state, like maybe other facilities can interconnect that line in the future. But right now, it's not going to do much to help us get power out of Any other questions?
So, earlier we were talking about robots that are generating components.
Yes.
You had also mentioned that part of the reasons are with these developers that build on private land, they still have to do a public outreach process. So I was just kind of curious, are any of the environmental groups starting to come on the bandwagon and say, we'll go ahead and comment because we feel like this growth of the industry is not really being evaluated on.
I think it's just starting to happen. We work with a lot of public relations firms and other, companies that help support developers, and they're all saying the same thing, like, you need to hurry up. If you don't get it in now, that's what's gonna happen. Not only are you gonna get the public pushback, but you're gonna draw the attention of these larger NGOs who haven't been paying attention to County's planning and zoning agendas, on a monthly basis to see if there's a new facility coming up. Like, if you don't live within 300 feet of the proposed facility, which is on unoccupied ranch land in northern Arizona, then you're never gonna hear about it unless you read the classified ads in the paper, I guess, for public notice. But it's up to date, it has caught a lot less attention, but now that people have caught on to what was going on, it's not gonna be it's gonna get a lot more interest from those agencies or NGOs.
And with the NGOs comment, then what is that, how does that change the process?
Honestly, I find a lot of the NGOs are a little bit easier to work with, because most of them are actually pretty supportive of solar and wind. They care a lot about climate change. They're usually focused on individual species or siting concerns, and they want to see specific mitigation measures implemented or design considerations for a specific species. They're not really so much trying to put a stop to a project as they are trying to help improve mitigation measures, maybe get some more commitments from the developer. Whereas public opposition is very, we don't want it at all, don't build it, we don't care about the wildlife, we care about our property values. So it's two very different forms of opposition.
So do the NGOs, if they speak up and want to work on, mitigating things or whatever, does that stop the streamline process?
For the CEC specifically, if you have anybody intervene and say, I think, we need more mitigation for this or more mitigation for that. Pretty much have to have a clean slate to get through the process. But most of these are probably gonna be the meetings are I think when there are concerns for species, probably take a line, not although I guess they didn't set a limit on the side of your line, it's only proximity to sensitive feature. Get a 10-mile line with no residents near it, said species or cultural sites. It's true.
Be hard to find that space.
I know it's really, it's funny because there's notification of finding something in 300-foot landowner notification. Nobody lives where these things are being built. The people who care about it live in the towns, 30 miles away. So they're not gonna get that letter this company. Well, yeah, I mean, not for every project, but I think, because we're filling up so many of those spaces around cities, like now we're pushing out further away from the city, and we're getting to some less developed areas. And then we start getting longer Gentile because they're not close to all that infrastructure.
You said 10 miles, that was the max that ACC is allowing?
Oh, no, anything under 1 mile, no longer, they're not gonna do it. There's no streamline process, there's nothing, you don't need.
No, that's just a single.
That was state law, they already signed that into law, here, doesn't matter, it would be going right through the heart of the residential neighborhood. People under 1. I mean, I think that the EEC never really, or the agency didn't anticipate that when they set this legislation. I don't think they realized how much work it's going to be coming, 10 years, 15 years down the line. I think some of it is trying to reduce redundancy too, because what we're seeing now is this buildup of redundancy of permitting process. It used to be that the local, municipalities were handling the zoning and some of these very specific little details, but now the local municipalities want to see the postal surveys and the bio surveys, and they want to get involved, they want to know. I've been on calls with County planning and zoning, and those commissioners know their stuff, like they're. I'm gonna put up a map or something, pronghorn routes, and they're not gonna let it go, like they're picking the map apart, detail by detail, what about this area, what about that area? No. They want to see these projects go through the same level of review as federal projects. But then if you're a federal project, now you've got to do that for the county, you've got to do it for the feds, and you've got to do it for your CEC maybe, so. I might be preparing 3 parallel environmental documents for the same project. I wish, we've got that in English, right, like, reliance on other environmental AUs, and every time I bring it up, they're like, well,
It's funny you say that about, that county, what was it, Pinell County?
mhm.
I talked to an individual and they said they are not doing solar, period, at all.
Yeah, I looked
They
into
won't
that.
even look at the project.
They passed a resolution and I didn't include it in the presentation because I didn't fully understand what it was. I didn't understand if they were banning all solar in the county or if it was specific to utility, or it was a little bit confusing. But
Yeah, I know what you're saying, because when I asked him and then I was like, okay, I'm not, because it was like, we're not doing solar. Well, what kind of solar? And he's like, we're not doing solar. It won't even be approved by the board.
yeah, and
So-
almost kind of been like the hot spot for a lot of this, because there's so much old agricultural land. And because of its proximity to Tucson and Phoenix, and that was, where some of those towns they were talking about, a couple of them. They just saw all the solar stuff getting built really fast, all the applications come in, and the counties are like, that's an hour.
Yeah.
So it's hard to predict, I mean, I've heard lots of rumors.
So
about
you've seen,
other counties.
you've seen or heard this too?
Yeah,
Yeah.
people are talking like, Coconino is just the first one, that Paz and Mojave and all these other counties are probably gonna follow suit, and they're probably gonna copy and paste Coconino County's resolution and then just pass it, in a very similar state of their own county, so. I didn't get too much into that, but I would anticipate, seeing that level of permitting required much more broadly across the state over the years. I mean, certainly the way, some of these county boards are responding, like, they don't even want to want to review, they just don't want the projects at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I can understand to a certain extent, a lot of the local landowners and ranchers and stuff, their argument is, well, why would I want this here, if all going to California? What can I say, they're right, I'm driving, it's gonna go to Arizona, we've already got too much power. So, it's kind of hard pill to swallow when you lived out somewhere for 30, 40 years, that's your whole life, and then somebody comes in and says, nothing you can do, we're gonna cover that up with solar panels.
Right.
No, we will get into it. No money for you either, by the way. There's not a lot of compensation that is on us for the land, so.
Yeah.
Okay, we're talking about your bill too.
Question?
Great.
Any questions online?
Go back.
And this is really more to the agency people here. So, for example, with Game and Fish, have you ever, is it even feasible to consider like a programmatic NEPA document that looks at what are the impacts on various species and just do it once and then tear off of that for the individual projects?
I think that's feasible, but it would take a lot because. I mean, Arizona is so diverse and it is kind of site by site and it really does depend on what's going on around that area too.
And I'm gonna jump into and so I haven't dealt as much with renewable energy, but I have dealt with transportation, like landscape connectivity, I focus on. And we don't know enough to put together a programmatic right now on the impacts of connectivity from these things. So, I think that it would be awesome to be there and to have that information, but there's still a lot of big question marks. So when I come to the table, any of these, It's basically, you know, if we're talking about, say, putting in a corridor between, you know, within an installation. The first question is logically, well, how big does that corridor need to be? There's a little bit of research out there. We're getting more right now. We have collars on deer, pronghorn, near some installations that are going to be built northern Arizona. So hopefully we'll have some information in a few years, but it's still all very theoretical and speculative. So being able to put together a robust programmatic is still a long ways away, I think. And on top of everything that Tiffany said about the differences. Different species.
And then I was also curious from the agency perspective, with so much of this power going over to California. And the fact that Arizona has not been very aggressive in setting their parameters. When Arizona finally does decide, oh, we have to get more aggressive, is there gonna be any space left for Arizona projects? Are they all gonna be taken up by California? Does that come up in the discussions?
I haven't heard that in any of the discussions because they're not focused on where the energy is going. They're just focused on getting the projects built.
Thanks.
Yeah, I haven't heard any discussion on where the energy is actually going.
I don't believe that's pretty late on that, it would be. COI, the goal is to, you know, transform our power source to be more effective. Whether it's serving Arizona or California, it's, you know, taking carbon out of the production. That's the big goal. Okay, thanks. It's not just my. Yeah, ACC, I mean, they did try that, you know, years ago, and they shut down, we were now power levers because it's just gonna take power in California, but then you serve us too well.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we did the presentation. And it is a recorded presentation. And we have recorded presentations and a big magnifier store online. Get our recording presentation from stage. Available to people.
It is being recorded and I'll try to upload it later this week.
Where can they access it at?
It's on the AZAEP YouTube page and in the emails that I send out, there is a link in there where it says, you know, if you want to watch previous presentations, go here, and you should be able to go there and see it. It's in our videos.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you guys can go check that out if you want to. Again, or share it with someone.
We just got the southern segment.
I think so.
We're not ready to the southern segment. Nancy.
Nancy.
Did you enjoy it?
Nick, I'm gonna end it.
Like, yeah.
I'm gonna end the recording. I'm gonna end the Zoom.
Yeah.